Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alright, so we stopped off at here. فإن اشتراها تغلبي له أرض لأرض عشر عليه العشر مضاعفا. So before that, last session we covered with regards to ushur. Whatever the land produces, according to Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, you have to give zakat of it, 10% if it's been naturally irrigated, and according to the Sahibain, you have to give 10% only if it is something that can be preserved, that can be stored away, and it has to be something that has reached a level of khamsat awsuq. And then we mentioned the different types of measurements according to Sahibain for other items that don't fit under the wasaq measure. And the last masala that we finished on was that you can't use the ushur money to pay the workers. So workers that are working on your ground, you can't pay them. Yeah, those are the ones that you can't pay. So anyway, so he says, قال Muhammad. So Imam Muhammad says this in Jami' al-Saghir. تغلبي له أرض عشر. There's a Taglibi person. Now, Banu Taglib were a tribe that was towards the north of Saudi Arabia. Right, so they were towards the north. They were known as the Banu Taglib. Okay, so they're known as Taglibiyun. So someone who is from the tribe of Banu Taglib is called Taglibi. So a Taglibi, why is a Taglibi out of all the tribes mentioned? Because there's a little incident that took place. That incident basically is when Umar radiallahu anhu went to get the kharaj. They refused to give kharaj, or they refused to give the money that they're supposed to give to the government. So what happened was Umar radiallahu anhu said to them, "Look, I'm going to take the money off you." Yeah. So they said, "No, we don't want to give it because it's humiliation to us. Like if people find out, our surrounding tribes find out that we have to pay as non-Muslims, we have to pay a tax towards the Muslim government, then this is going to be counted as being like a humiliation towards us." Right? So they said, we don't want to pay what the normal people pay. And obviously the Quran mentions about this, that you take the jizya off them, an yadin wa hum saghirun. Yeah, so you have to, basically the government has to take the jizya, because the jizya is a way of showing subjugation, that the non-Muslims living in a Muslim country will be protected, their rights will be protected, but they have to know it's because they're non-Muslim that they have to pay this money. So this jizya, they didn't want to pay this. So they made a big fuss about it. Eventually they said, look, double it and call it what you want, but don't call it jizya, and we'll give you. So Umar radiallahu anhu said, okay, that's fine. Right? We will charge you a double of what we take off the normal. And we won't call it jizya, we'll call it whatever you want to call it. But in reality, it is jizya. So this was like a kind of like a way of them, this was a way of them sort of paying the money, but then not having that tarnished reputation or that shame to them in their community. So this is why the masla of Taglibi comes. So if there's a Taglibi and he has a land that is a ushri land. So remember, lands are divided into two types. You have a land which is an ushri land. Yeah, so an ushri land is basically that land which is which has belonged to the Muslims. The Muslims use it. Zakat has to be given on it. And a kharaji land is a land which is was taken from the non-Muslims, through war, and it's ghanima. So therefore, the land now has a specific type of tax on there. It's called a kharaj. So he says there's a Taglibi person, and he owns a land that's an ushri land. Out of the two lands, his land falls under ushri land. So what does he give? So alayhi al-ushru muda'afan. So this Taglibi will now have to give double of the ushur. So that land, if a Muslim owned it, so let's say the Muslim owned it and he had to give £100. The Taglibi, if he owns that same land, he would have to give on a yearly basis £200. He'd have to give double of what a Muslim would have given on that. Yeah, so alayhi al-ushru muda'afan. He would have to give the ushur, but double. Where do we get this from? Why is Taglibi so unique for? Because عُرِفَ ذَلِكَ بِإِجْمَاعِ الصَّحَابَة. In the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, there was an ijma' that was done, and this is an ijma' sukuti, right? So in usul al-fiqh, we learn about the different types of ijma', and there's ijma' which is sarih, and there's ijma' which is sukuti ijma'. So this was learned from the time of Umar, and everyone was silent on this and approved of it. So that now, because of that ijma' issue, we have to carry that ruling on now for the Taglibis. Now clearly, the Banu Taghlib now, they're probably all accepted Islam now, right? So the ruling of them is going to be different now. Yeah, it is the case for their heirs and families now. So they would have accepted Islam, they would have changed, and possibly, I'm not too sure about what the modern scholars say about taking from Banu Taghlib, but this was obviously written in a time that was in the time of Muhammad, where the Taghlibis would still have been around. There's possibly quite a few tribes left of the Banu Taghlib, but then they wouldn't have that same. I don't think they would have that same. I'm not too sure. I haven't researched in contemporary fatwa what the scholars have said about this. But this is in the time of Imam Muhammad. So he says, "Taghlibiyun lahu ardu." This is وعن Muhammad. Okay, what's the incident? So the incident was over here. Yeah. So the incident is بإجماع وتقدم بيان في قصة عمر. Okay, actually I thought he's going to bring the story, but he doesn't bring it. Anyway, he says عرف وعن محمد, and it's reported from Muhammad, a second riwayah, أن فيما اشتراه التغلبي من مسلم أشرا واحدا. So Imam Muhammad differs with Abu Hanifa and Imam Yusuf with regards to how we deal with if a Taglibi was to purchase land of a Muslim. And so by saying Taglibi, obviously he is referring to someone from that tribe. He buys a land from a Muslim individual. Yeah, so he buys a land, اشتراه تغلبي من Muslim. What does he have to do? Does that land now become double? Does he have to now give muda'af? So Imam Muhammad says no. Ushran wahid. He only has to give one ushr. The reason for this, why does Imam Muhammad say this? He says لأن الوظيفة, because the rule according to him, the duty according to him, is عنده لا تتغير بتغير المالك. So let's say, for example, this is a piece of land, and this land is owned by a Muslim, and then a Taglibi comes along and says, I want to buy this land of you. If he buys the land, according to Imam Abu Hanifa, he would have to give double, because the rule is that a Taglibi, if he has an ard ushr, he would have to give double. But according to Imam Muhammad, he says the land's ruling is intrinsic to the land, meaning whoever purchases the land's ruling will be the same. It won't change. So if the land is a ushri land, the land will stay ushri. Yeah. So that's Imam Muhammad's position. Whereas according to Imam Abu Hanifa, he would say that it would change. So this is why he says, according to Imam Muhammad, أن فيما اشتراه تغلبي, any land that's purchased by a Taglibi, min al-Muslim, from another Muslim, from a Muslim, ushran wahidan, he would only have to give one ushr. So even though the Taglibi is a non-Muslim, yeah, we're still going to take from him an ushr. But remember, ushr is an ibadah because it's zakat, so it won't be treated like zakat, but it will be treated like this because Umar radiallahu anhu had made that agreement with them that he's going to take from them what the Muslims give as zakat, but double. So because Umar radiallahu anhu stated that, and that became like the ijma'i position, so the Hanafis are sticking to that now. Imam Muhammad is rather. لأن الوظيفة عنده, because the duty according to him, the ruling according to him, is لا تتغير بتغير المالك. Yeah. So just like, for example, let's say a Muslim was to buy a kharaj land from a non-Muslim. So there's a non-Muslim who owns a land, and that's a kharaj land. He's been giving kharaj on that land for years. He decides to sell the land to a Muslim. Muslim buys it off him. According to Imam Muhammad, the Muslim now has to give kharaj on that land. So instead of the ushr, he'd have to give kharaj. So kharaj would be the duty, because the duty of the land doesn't change with the changing of the malik. Okay, everyone understand that? Now, in a bit, I'm going to read to you what Ibn Abidin summarizes this in a very nice way. Right, so I'll just read what he says in a bit. فَإِنِ اشْتَرَاحَ مِنْهُ ذِمِّيٌّ. Okay, so now if a dhimmi purchases that land from a Taglibi, so there is a Taglibi, he owns this land, he's been giving double of zakat, double of ushr on that, the produce of that land. So now comes along a dhimmi is just a random non-Muslim, and he buys that land of a dhimmi, of a Taglibi. فَهِيَ عَلَى حَالِهَا عِنْدَهُمْ. Yeah, so according to everyone, indahum meaning according to all Hanafis, they say that the land is going to be in its same hal as it was before. Yeah, so he would have to give the double ushur. So if a dhimmi gets it, then it's going to stay as it is, right? So he would have to give double ushur, right? Because Imam Muhammad says the land's wazifa doesn't change. So because he was giving double ushur before, so this dhimmi that's purchased it, he's also going to have to give double ushur, right? So he says, لِجَوَازِ التَّضْعِيف. So someone might raise an objection here and say that why is this the case for? Isn't this unfair? Because the doubling of the ruling was for the Taglibi. How can you use the doubling of the ruling for the dhimmi? So he says the argument is لِجَوَازِ التَّضْعِيف عَلَيْهِ فِي الْجُمْلَةِ. Because it's permissible for a Muslim government to charge a dhimmi extra. So charging a dhimmi extra for the kharaj, that's totally fine. Yeah, so they are allowed to be charged extra. So because the tad'if, because of the doubling of the ruling is simply, from one perspective, it's simply charging the dhimmi extra. That's fine. That's not breaking any rules. Kama idha marra ala ashir. Just like if a dhimmi was to go past an ashir. Yeah, so what happens? So when remember we talked about this before. If a dhimmi goes past a checkpoint of a Muslims, and the ashir was to take from him, he takes double of what he takes from a Muslim. So from a Muslim he'll take rubu ushur, and from the non-Muslim he'll take nisf ushur. Yeah, so just like over there, the Muslim is given like the non-Muslim is charged double. Yeah, so over here just it says فَإِنَّهُ يُؤْخَذْ مِنْهُ نِصْفَ الْعُشْرِ, because from a non-Muslim the ashir will take half, and from a Muslim it takes rubu ushur, 2.5% from the Muslim and double. So the idea is that there is some concept in our fiqh where a person is actually charged extra. Dhimmi is actually charged extra. So because that exists, that's fine. This is not being unfair to him. Minhu goes back to Muslim or Taglibi. Which minhu? Is that minhu, meaning Taglibi. Yeah, because red writing's in it. Yeah, Taglibiyun lahu ardun ushur. Yeah, so فإن اشتراها منه ذمي. Okay, وكذا إذا اشتراها منه مسلم. Right, so likewise, Taglibi owns this land. Yeah, it's muda'af land. It's double ushur land. And a Muslim comes along and he wants to buy this land now. So if the Muslim buys this land, the Muslim is going to have to pay double now. If the Muslim bought a different land from a Muslim, he would only have to pay the normal ushur. But because he's bought this land off the Taglibi, then he'll have to pay the double. So he says, وَكَذَا إِذَا اشْتَرَاحَ مِنْهُ مُسْلِمٌ. And likewise, when a Muslim purchases this land, yeah, so a Muslim purchases the land off the Taglibi, he's got to pay double. Or أَسْلَمَ التَّغْلِبِيُّ. Or even if, according to Abu Hanifa, even if that Taglibi, that same Taglibi was to become a Muslim. Yeah, so that Taglibi became a Muslim. Because he was a Taglibi from before, his religion has changed. He still has to pay, according to Abu Hanifa, he has to pay that double rate. سواء كان التضعيف أصليا أو حادثا. So irrespective of whether that tad'if is asli or hadith, what does that mean? So asli tad'if basically means that the doubling of the rate was because the Taglibi, that land that the Taglibi owns today, let's say 10 years ago he inherited it from his forefathers. That is called a tad'if asli. In other words, because he's inherited it from his forefathers, it was originally a double land. Yeah, so he was charged double because it was originally asli. And then hadith means if, for example, it wasn't originally it was a muda'af land, but now what's happened is ownership has changed, and now it has actually now become so let's say Muslim owned it before, and the Taglibi now has come and he's purchased it. So when he's purchased it, the ruling of that land changes now. It's become in the ruling of a Taglibi. Yeah, so in other words, if a Taglibi owns a land, he's got to give muda'af. If a Taglibi was to sell it to a dhimmi, he's got to give muda'af. Yeah, double the rate. If a Muslim buys it from a Taglibi, then he's got to give double the rate. And if a Taglibi accepts Islam, he's still got to give double according to Imam Abu Hanifa. Right? So whether that land was originally in their forefathers was considered to be an original double rate land, or whether it was not double rate in the beginning, like let's say some other land now. A Muslim owns a land and he's been given ushur on this land. And then all of a sudden, Taglibi buys it off him. If the Taglibi buys it off him, according to Abu Hanifa, he says that now the rate is going to change now. For the Muslim, it used to be ushur, but now this Taglibi has purchased the land, the rate goes up now. Yeah, so it becomes a double rate. Then wouldn't the double charge be still applicable on the land at present, even if they are all Muslim? Yeah, and according to Abu Hanifa, that should be the case then. Yeah, that should be the case. But like we say, if because it's Taglibi, isn't it? But let's say, for example, this Taglibi becomes a Muslim, and then this Muslim sells it to a different Muslim. Right? So what's going to happen over there? This is where there's an ikhtilaf between Imam Abu Hanifa, Abu Yusuf and Muhammad on this. Because remember, Imam Muhammad's principle is that the land stays as it is, right? It does not change. So whatever the land, if it's a double rate land, it's always going to be a double rate land. And if it's according to Imam Hanifa, if it's exchanged, if it used to be something and then it's exchanged, then you look at whether the Taglibi had it or not. And then it's going to mention Imam Abu Yusuf's position on this. Now this is all if it exchanges ownership, okay. But if that land no longer becomes owned or someone else takes over it, then that ruling of Taglibi ends. لأن التضعيف صار وظيفة لها. Yeah, so because the tad'if has now become the duty of this land now. So it wasn't there before, and now it's become that. فَتَنْتَقِلُ إِلَى الْمُسْلِمِ. So then therefore the ruling of this now is going to transfer to a Muslim. بِمَا فِيهَا كَالْخَرَاجِ. Yeah, with whatever is in it, like kharajes. So if the land is kharaj land, and a Muslim buys a kharaj land, he's got to pay the kharaj rates. Yeah, so he's saying that Imam Abu Hanifa is comparing it with kharaj. Yeah, so changing of ownership in kharaj does not remove the kharaj rate. Likewise, changing ownership from a taglibi does not remove the taglibi rate. قال أبو يوسف رحمه الله يعود إلى عشر واحد. And this is why, like I said, I do not know if there exists today such a land anymore. Like I haven't read it anywhere. Maybe it does, maybe there's some rare places where this land will exist. قال أبو يوسف رحمه الله يعود إلى عشر واحد. Imam Abu Yusuf says no, it goes back down to one ushur. So Imam Abu Yusuf رحمه الله, his principle is that when the double rate has been charged, that double rate is actually charged because of kufr. So in other words, the double rate will only be charged in the state of kufr. That's what it is. So therefore, if it has been sold to a Muslim, the double rate cannot be charged. Yeah, because the whole reason, the illah of charging the double rate is because they were non-Muslims. So قال أبو يوسف يعود إلى عشر واحد. Therefore, the land now is going to become an ushur land, right? And then the Muslim will only have to pay an ushur on there. لزوال الداعي إلى التضعيف, because the reason, the cause for tad'if, and that cause was kufr, that no longer exists now because a Muslim has taken it over. Yeah, or whether he accepts Islam. So if the Taglibi accepts Islam, there's no reason to charge him double. قال في الكتاب. So he says in the kitab, meaning in Mabsut, it says وهو قول محمد. So kitab most likely refers to Sarakhsi's Mabsut. So Sarakhsi says وهو قول محمد. This is actually also the Imam Muhammad's qawl. فيما صح عنه, regarding those riwayats that have been reported from him in a sahih way. So in other words, according to Imam Muhammad, this is the case, that if a person was to buy such a land from a Taglibi, or the Taglibi became Muslim, then this is what is taken. And this seems to also be indication towards we said before, the ikhtilaf of the other issue on this as well. So normally Imam Muhammad says that the land remains as it is. Yeah, but over here he's saying the stronger position from him is this. قال المصنف اختلفت النسخ في بيان قوله. The different versions of Jami' al-Saghir, they differ with regards to what is intended by Imam Muhammad's qawl. What is it? Is Imam Muhammad really saying the land stays as it is? Because that's what we learned before. He's saying the land is as it is, So if it was an Ushr land, it stays Ushr. If it was a Kharaji land, it stays Kharaji. If it was a double rate land, then it stays double rate. Or is it this one? Yeah, where he says that if it's bought by a Muslim, then it does change. وَالْأَصَحْ أَنَّهُ مَعْ أَبِي حَنِيفَ فِي بَقَاءِ التَّضْعِيفِ. So he says the more sahih position seems to be that Imam Muhammad is with Abu Hanifa with regards to this particular two cases. Yeah, the case where the Muslim purchases it off the Taglibi, stays a double rate, or if the Taglibi accepts Islam, it stays as a double rate. إلا أن قوله لا يتأتى إلا في الأصل. However, he says if you try to reconcile it with his earlier qaida, his dabita, which was that the land's wadifa stays as it is, then he says أن قوله لا يتأتى, his statement will not occur إلا في الأصل, except in the asli. So remember we said the tad'if, the double rate is either asli, meaning it's been inherited from the forefathers, or it's hadith, meaning that it's something which is new. Like for example, a Taglibi has purchased this land of a Muslim, so now it's actually transferred from an Ushri. So he's saying إلا أن قوله لا يتأتى, except that Imam Muhammad's statement in that case, if he's with Abu Hanifa, it won't work in the hadith scenario. It will only work in the asli scenario, because remember Imam Muhammad says it stays as it is. So in the hadith scenario, because it's a double rate, if a Taglibi buys it off a Muslim, it's going to stay as a ushri, just like we said in the last one. And therefore, if the Muslim was to purchase it off the other guy, it's going to stay as it is as well. So he says لأن التضعيف الحادث, because تضعيف الحادث لا يتحقق عنده. According to Imam Muhammad, if a Taglibi buys a land of a Muslim, that land will be considered to be an Ushri land, right? So it won't change. So in other words, it's as though Imam Muhammad is with Abu Yusuf in the other masla, and he's with Imam Abu Yusuf in the hadith masala, and he's with Abu Hanifa in the asli masala. That's how we can understand it. Do you understand? So to summarize this, so if a Taglibi was to have a piece of land, then the government will charge him double the rate of Ushr of what a normal Muslim would be charged for his produce. This is according to Abu Hanifa, Abu Yusuf. Imam Muhammad says that no, the Taglibi will be charged double, but if he was to purchase it off a Muslim, then the land will stay as an Ushr land, because the rule is the land is the one that dictates how much you pay. The person doesn't. And as for the second masala, which is what if a Muslim buys it off a Taglibi, so a double rate land purchased by a Muslim, or Taglibi who's paying double rate becomes a Muslim, then what Abu Hanifa says, then he also has to give double the rate. And according to Abu Yusuf, he says no. He says it goes back to the original, because the whole illah was based upon kufr, and no longer kufr exists, so therefore he only has to pay an ushr. And what does Imam Muhammad say? So it seems as though Sarakhsi is saying Imam Muhammad is with Imam Abu Yusuf in this, but Imam Sahib al-Hidayah is saying that there's ikhtilaf in the nuskhas, and it seems as though Imam Muhammad should really be with Imam Abu Hanifa in this, and that's the sahih position. Anyway, وَلَوْ كَانَتِ الْأَرْضُ لِمُسْلِمٍ بَاعَهَا مِنْ نَصْرَانِيٍ. Okay, what if the land now belongs to a Muslim? So a Muslim owns this land, and he has now sold this land. He has now sold this land to a Christian now. So a Christian has bought it off him. All right. So then what's going to happen here? So a Muslim is normally paying the ushr rate. If a Christian buys it off him, yeah. So this Christian is not a Taglibi, okay, just a normal Christian. Yuridu bihi dhimmiyan. What he means by this is a dhimmi. So it can be a Christian, or it can be a Jew, or it can be a Majus, as long as it's not a Taglibi, غير Taglibi. وَقَبَضَهَا. And then this Christian has actually taken possession of the land. How much does he have to give? So Abu Hanifa says, عليه الخراج. Because that Muslim cannot give ushr, he would have to give kharaj on this. Yeah, so the kharaj would apply to the non-Muslim. So that ushr land shifts now from ushri to kharaj in the Abi Hanifa. لأنه أليق بحال الكافر. Because this is more appropriate with the state of a non-Muslim. Yeah, a non-Muslim cannot pay ushr, so he gives this. وَإِنْ Abi Yusuf rahimahullah عليه الأشر مضاعفا. Abu Yusuf says no, he should be charged double the rate of ushur. So every time a dhimmi buys a land of a Muslim, if that land is a kharaj land, obviously stays kharaj. If it's not a kharaj land, it's a ushur land, then the non-Muslim will be charged double the rate. Yeah. Now this is not the Taglibi rule, right? But like we said, a non-Muslim can be charged extra. وَيُسْرَفُ مَصَارِفُ الْخَرَاج. So even though he is being charged double the ushur, it won't be treated like ushur. Like if there's the Muslim government has a Baytul Mal, right, and they have different departments, different sort of accounts for the funds that come in. This money will not go into the account of ushur, because ushur is part of zakat, and the rules of zakat have to be distributed in a correct way. So therefore, this money that's collected from the non-Muslim dhimmis who own lands will not go into the ushur pot. It's going to go into the kharaj pot. وَيُسْرَفْ مَصَارِفَ الْخَرَاج. It will be spent in those areas, in those departments, the areas of kharaj. اعتبارا بالتغليبي, taking into consideration the Taglibi situation. وَهَذَا أَهْوَنُ مِنَ التَّبْدِيلِ. And this is considered to be easier than tabdil. Meaning, this is easier, according to Abu Yusuf, he's saying, this is easier than shifting the ruling of the land into another ruling. Rather than saying, ushur has now become kharaj, he says, just charge them extra on the ushur. And Abu Hanifa says, no, you can change the ruling of the land. So Abu Hanifa says, changing the ruling of the land is possible. And Abu Yusuf says, no, the land ruling will not change. All we're doing is we're raising the rates. That's all we're doing. And he says, this is easier. هذا أهون. Yeah. Okay. So he says, وَإِنْدَ Muhammad, what does Muhammad say? هِيَ أُشْرِيَةٌ عَلَى حَالِهَا. This land will now remain ushri as it is. Yeah, because, like we said, his rule was that the land dictates how much the person has to give. Yeah, so inda Muhammad rahimullah, hiya ushriyatun ala haliha. And if you notice, when it says inda does not mean that this is their qawl. Inda is simply implying that this is takhrij and based on their madhab. This is what we assume their madhab should be. Right? So remember, we have qawl of the mujtahid, we have riwayah of the mujtahid, and then we have the position of the mujtahid. So this is a position, this is. لِأَنَّهُ صَارَ مُؤُونَةً. Because this fee that they're being charged for has now become a mu'una. Yeah, so in other words, it's become the burden of the land. Yeah, this is like the fee of the land. فَلَا يَتَبَدَّلْ كَالْخَرَاجِ. So he says this cannot change like kharaj. Yeah, so just like kharaj cannot change. He cannot change like kharaj. Kharaj can change, but this can't. So he says this is the mu'una of the land. Just like kharaj is the mu'una of the land. Yeah, so just like kharaj is based upon the land itself. Similarly, in this case, ushur is also considered to be something of the land. ثُمَّ فِي رِوَايَةٍ يُسْرَفْ مَصَارِفَ الصَّدَقَاتِ. And then in one riwayah is considered, so he says, فِي رِوَايَةٍ, in one riwayah, يُسْرَفُ, the money that's taken from this, according to Muhammad, he says, it should be spent in the sadaqah pot. So it should be put in the sadaqah account, and it can be treated like all sadaqats, meaning it can be treated like all zakat. Yeah. So you can give it to all the poor people, and you can spend it on the soldiers, and you can spend it on whatever needs to be spent. وَفِي رِوَايَةٍ يُسْرَفْ مَصَارِفَ الْخَرَاج. And in one riwayah from Imam Muhammad, he says, no, it should be spent in the masarif al-kharaj. Yeah, and this is a riwayah that's reported from Ibn Sama'a, his student. Yeah, that it should be spent only in the kharaj, whatever kharaj has been used for. And the reason for that is because this is considered to be non-ibadah. And because it's non-ibadah, it should be put in the non-ibadah pot. Right? So to differentiate between the two funds, he says it should be put in the kharaj. So there's two riwayahs that have been reported from him, and Sahib al-Hidayah doesn't seem to give a tarjih to any of these. Yeah, he doesn't give a tarjih. Okay, so now I just want to show you guys in Radd al-Muhtar. Let's find this mas'ala. Okay, so here in Rad al-Muhtar, this is where the masla is. He says, ويجب ضعفه في أرض عشرية لتغلبيين مطلقا. Yeah, so it's necessary to give double in land which is ushri for the Taglibiin. So Taglibi people, they would have to give double. Mutlaqan, absolutely. And this is going to come later. وإن كان طفلا أو أنثى, even if the Taglibi is a child and even if the Taglibi is a woman, they own the land, they'll have to give it as well. أسلم, whether he accepts Islam, أو ابتاعها من مسلم, or whether he has purchased it from a Muslim, he still has to give. أو ابتاعها منه مسلم, or whether a Muslim has purchased it from him, or even a dhimmi has purchased it from him. In all these cases, he says that it'll have to be given double the rate. لأن التضعيف كالخراج فلا يتبدل. So the tad'if is like kharaj. So it's like you're treating the tad'if as being a form of kharaj. فلا يتبدل, and so this doesn't change. It's almost like you can say that the funds, the produce of the lands themselves is considered to be something which is fixed. Yeah, just like we have different fees for different types of lands in this country. Yeah, so if you're living in a certain type of house, you have to pay a certain type of council tax, irrespective of who moves into the house. Yeah, so it's a similar concept like that. Is masarif al-kharaj maf'ul mutlaq? Masraf, no. Masarif maf'ul mutlaq. I don't understand. Masarif is ism dharf. Okay. So maf'ul mutlaq has to be masdar. Then he says وأخذ الخراج من ذمي غير تغلبي. Kharaj will be taken from a dhimmi who is not a taglibi, who has purchased أرضا أشرية, an ushri land, min muslimin, from another Muslim. Yeah, so remember we said that Abu Hanifa rahimahullah and Abu Yusuf, Muhammad's position. وقبضها منه للتنافي. Yeah, and he has taken possession of it due to the tanafi, meaning the contradiction between a land being ushri and a land being kharaj. It can't be a ushri and kharaj at the same time. So it either has to be ushri or it has to be kharaj. Abu Hanifa says it's kharaj. وأخذ الأشر من مسلم أخذها منه من الذمي. And if a Muslim was to take this land off a dhimmi, this is the shufa' masla, which we're going to talk about in a bit. Okay, this is the thing that I wanted to show you guys, but I just went off on a tangent there. Where is it? Okay, حاصل, here is. So look at this. حاصل هذه المسائل. All these مسائل, the summation of all this. كما في البحر أن الأرض إما أشرية. A land is either going to be considered to be ushri, or خراجية, or it's going to be considered to be kharaji, or it's going to be تضعيفية. So there's three types of land then. Ushri land, kharaji land, and تضعيفي land, double rate land. والمشترون, and the buyers are either going to be Muslim, dhimmi, and taglibi. So فالمسلم إذا اشترى الأشرية, if a Muslim was to buy an ushri land, or he was to buy a kharaji land, بقيت على حالها. The land will stay as it is. Yeah, so it will stay as it is, meaning it will stay. If a Muslim was to buy a ushri land, it stays as ushri. If he buys a kharaji land, it stays as kharaji. Or a tad'ifiyah. But what if he was to buy a tad'ifi land? This is where there's ikhtilaf. So فكذلك عندهما, according to Abu Hanifa and Muhammad, right, according to that opinion of Muhammad that we mentioned, remember the stronger position that he's with Abu Hanifa, then it will remain tad'ifi. وقال أبو يوسف ترجع إلى أشر واحد. Then he only has to give one ushur. Yeah, like we said, because he says the da'i is kufr, no longer kufr, so he goes fine. وإذا اشترى التغليبي الخراجية. What if a Taglibi was to buy a Kharaji land? He says بقيت خراجية, it will remain خراجية. And أو تضعيفية. What if he buys a تضعيفي land, a double rate land? فهي تضعيفية, then it will be treated as a تضعيفي land. أو الأشرية. What if he buys an Ushri land من مسلم? Then the government will double his rate. Yeah, عندهما, according to Abu Hanifa and according to Abu Yusuf. خلافا لمحمد. Imam Muhammad, he says no. Yeah, remember we said, because he says the land stays as it is, it doesn't change. The mu'una of the land, the wadif of the land. Okay. وإذا اشترى الذمي, the third one now. What if a dhimmi was to buy the land who is not a taglibi, خراجية أو تضعيفية, بقيت على حالها, it will remain as it is. So خراجية, تضعيفية, if he buys it, stays as it is. Because remember, خراجية is خراجية, and then تضعيفية is simply just charging him double the rate. He's allowed to. أو أشرية, and what if he was to buy an Ushri land? صارت خراجية. This Ushri land would become خراجي. Yeah. إن استقرت في ملكه عنده, if it was to stay in his ownership. Yeah. So that's basically a nice summary of this whole discussion that he's had over here. Okay. All right. New masla now. But this is connected with the previous one, but it's just new in the sense that that particular thing is finished. Okay. Now he says, فإن أخذها منه مسلم بالشفعة أو ردت على البائع لفساد البيع فهي أشرية كما كانت. Right, so this is talking about from the previous masla, yeah, which is لو كانت الأرض لمسلم باعها من نصراني, and he has sold it to a Christian. Yeah, what happens here? So he said Abu Hanifa says it's become Kharaji land. Abu Yusuf says it stays Ushri but double the rate, and Imam Muhammad says it stays Ushri. Right. Okay, but now this Christian who, so let's call this is the Muslim guy, this is the Christian. The Christian has bought this land. Now, as you guys know, in buyu, when you make a contract with someone, ijab and qabul is done. Ownership of the property exchanges or transfers immediately to the other person, as long as it's a bayt sahih, right? And if it's a bayt fasid, then ownership will only transfer when qabd is done. And if it's a bayt batil, ownership will never transfer. All right, these are three types of contracts. So he says, if this Christian was to buy this property, let's say this land, right, he's bought it off him, and what happened was that this Christian has now sold it off to another Muslim. So the Christian has gone and sold it to another Muslim, and he sold it through shuf'ah. Yeah, so he's sold it through shuf'ah. What does that mean? So it means, let's say for instance, this Christian, his next door neighbor was a Muslim. This Christian is selling his land. So Islamically, as you guys know through Hidayah or through Quduri, that if you sell your property, your neighbor has the right to buy the property first. Yeah, they have the right to buy the property first. So if the neighbor of the Christian was a Muslim and he's purchased the land through the right of shufa, yeah, he's purchased the land through the right of shufa, then what's happened is that so basically what's happened is this. So let's go back now. This Muslim sold this Christian this land, yeah? He wasn't supposed to. This Muslim had another Muslim neighbor and he was supposed to offer it to him. So this Muslim now, if he was to go and sell this land to this Christian, this Muslim now goes court and he files a shufa case. So what happens is now this selling of the property is going to be nullified, voided by the government, by the judge. So when it's void, the land has to be given to this Muslim and the money has to be returned, and this Muslim now will give money to him. Does everyone understand that? Yeah. So let me say again. So the Muslim, he sold the land to the Christian. So the land shifted from a Ushri land, according to Abu Hanifa, to a Kharaji land. Yeah. And according to Abu Yusuf, to a double rate land. And according to Muhammad, stays the same. So this ushr has now become kharaji according to Abu Hanifa. Then what happens is that this next door neighbor Muslim files a shuf'a case. He wins the case. So therefore the judge will nullify the contract between them two. Once that's nullified, the land will be given to this guy. The point here is this: what will happen to that changing of the rates? So when it became kharaji, will it now stay kharaji for this next door neighbor, this Muslim next door neighbor? Because technically, it's as though this Muslim has sold it to this Muslim. Does everyone understand that? Yeah. Now, if this Muslim sold the land to the Christian fairly and there was no shuf'a case, and then this Christian was to go and sell it off to a Muslim, that would be a different case. That would be, yeah. So Muslim sold it to Christian. According to Abu Hanifa, it's become kharaj land. According to Abu Yusuf, it's double. According to Muhammad, it's ushr. And then the Christian sold it to another Muslim. Then this Muslim, according to Abu Hanifa, would have to pay the kharaj on it. Yeah. Okay. So he says, فَإِذَا أَخَذَهَا مِنْهُ مُسْلِمٌ بِالشُّفْعَةِ. So if a Muslim, next door neighbor Muslim, took the land off this Christian by way of shuf'a, that's one case. And then the second case is, أو ردت على البائع أو ردت على البائع لفساد البيع. So ردت على البائع is this. Let's say, for example, this Christian, this Muslim, sold the land to the Christian, but there was some sort of fasad in the contract. Yeah. So for example, like let's say there was some sort of aib in it, or the bait was a bait fasid, and the land was given back to him, and you're allowed to do that. So in buyu, if you ever sell something or you buy something through bait fasid, before possession takes place, no transfer of ownership has taken place. So therefore, both parties have the right to void the contract. And even after possession takes place, the person who caused the fasad in the contract has the right to void the contract. Okay. So in this case, if the Christian now returns the goods, returns the property to the Muslim, because of fasad al-bayt, what happens now to this land? It became kharaji, and now it's been given back. Does it stay kharaji or not? He says no. فَهِيَ أُشْرِيَةٌ كَمَا كَانَتْ. According to everyone. So according to everyone, this land will now be considered to be back as it was. Yeah. Why is this? أما الأول, as for the shufa case, فَلِتَحَوُّلِ الصَّفْقَةِ إِلَى الشَّفِيء. In the first case is because the contract has now shifted between these two to between these two now. Yeah. So these two, the Muslim and the Christian, and now the Muslim and the Muslim. So it's simply just a matter of shifting of that. So he says, أما الأول, as for the first scenario, فَلِتَحَوُّلِ الصَّفْقَةِ. The safqa means a transaction, right? The trade, the contract, has now shifted to the shafi'. كَأَنَّهُ اشْتَرَاهَا مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِ. It's as though the Muslim purchased it off the Muslim now, right? Because that contract is as though it didn't even happen. أما الثاني, as for the second fasid contract, فَلِأَنَّهُ بِالرَّدِّ. Because by the Christian giving it back to the Muslim, وَالْفَسْخ بِحُكْمِ الْفَسَادِ, and the voiding of the contract, بِحُكْمِ الْفَسَادِ, due to the defective nature, ruling of defectiveness, جُئِلَ الْبَيْء. The bait has now been made كَأَنْ لَمْ يَكُنْ, as though it didn't even happen, right? Because that's what happens with these type of fasid contracts. وَلِأَنَّ, and the rational argument is لِأَنَّ حَقَّ الْمُسْلِمِ لَمْ يَنْقَطِعْ بِهَذَا الشِّرَاءِ. Yes, it's because the right of the Muslim did not cease with these type of contracts, meaning the contract of fasad, bay al-fasid or shufa. Yeah, because this original guy's ownership didn't really kind of fully disappear. Yeah, because someone else had the right of shufa and fasad as well. So he says, لأن حق المسلم, the haqq of this Muslim, لم ينقطع, has not ceased بهذا الشراء, by with this purchase of the Christian. لكونه مستحق الرد. Yeah, because this contract was deserving of being returned, meaning of being voided. Yeah, so mustahaq or mustahiq al-rad, meaning that this contract deserves to be nullified. Yeah, rad likonihi, for that. Yeah. Okay, we'll stop there because the next one is another masla. Okay, so everyone understand that? So what's the khulasa? What's the summary of all of what we've done today then? So the summary of what we've done today is first of all, if a taglibi was to purchase a land of if he has a land, ushur land, then the government's going to charge him double the rate. This is because of a case that happened in the time of Umar radiallahu anhu with the Taglibis, and the ijma' was done, and then everyone seems to have just kept that as it is. Imam Muhammad rahimullah, his argument is that land does not change. So whatever rate the land is being charged, that stays the same whoever buys it. Yeah, so he has that rule. And what if a dhimmi was to purchase it off him? Then everyone says if a dhimmi buys it off a taglibi, the double rate will still be charged to him. Yeah, because you're allowed to charge dhimmi's double rate. And okay, what if a Muslim was to buy it off him? Or what if this taglib became Muslim? Abu Hanifa says it stays the same. Right? It's going to stay the same. Whether the ownership of the double rate of the land is due to an asl reason, or it's due to a hadith reason, a new reason, right? So just like he took it off a Muslim. Abu Yusuf rahimullah, he says no. He says the land will go back to being a ushri land because the whole illah is pivoted upon kufr. Yeah, so this is the reason for it. And what about Imam Muhammad's position? So he says Sarakhsi seems to indicate that Muhammad is with Abu Yusuf, but Sahib Hidayah says I've looked at all the nuskhas, and it seems that the most correct nuskha is that Imam Muhammad is actually with Abu Hanifa on this masla, meaning that it will stay, double the rate. And this is only in the asli case. And what if the land belongs to a Muslim and he sold it to a Christian, then what? So if he sold it to a Christian who's a non-Taglibi and the Christian takes possession of it, according to Abu Hanifa, the land becomes a Kharaji land. According to Abu Yusuf, it stays as an Ushri land, but it's doubled. And according to Imam Muhammad, it stays in Ushri land and he only has to give an Ushur. Yeah, so these are the three positions. And then finally we just said, but what if that sale between the Muslim and the Christian, it gets voided somehow? How? So he gives two scenarios: through a claim of shufa, or through the Christian saying this bayt is fasid. And he goes, then it goes back to its original, what it was when the Muslim had it. Okay. Alright guys, Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.